Exchange, monitoring, and reporting. I think we could call nugget number 17 here kind of like miscellaneous. The topics that you need to know for the exam associated with exchange monitoring and reporting are fairly wide in scope. But really what you need to know is that more or less you need to monitor exchange and that there are mechanisms by which you can report on exchange. And I'm going to show you in this nugget a couple of different PowerShell commands you need to be aware of, and then also some of the locations where you're going to set up monitoring and look at reports, and also configure some of the logging things that are in Exchange. If you haven't already figured it out, there are a number of locations where logging can actually be configured and adjusted so you can see what's going on under the covers inside of Exchange. In this nugget, we're going to talk about monitoring of the databases and how you can look at database status and statistics and also some public folder statistics. I'm not going to revisit the sort of statistics that we already looked at when we talked about the mailbox server role or when we talked in the last nugget about public folders. We also want to just recognize the fact that you do need to monitor your database availability groups and the replication of those database availability groups. Now, a little aside here. The tools that are available inside of Exchange to assist you with this monitoring, they're fairly basic. I mean, you can look at some of the replication statistics there and see when your replication is queuing up or when your mailboxes are getting full, those sorts of things. But really, if you want to go to the point where you can be alerted when problems are occurring, which is really what I think all of us want to do, we really at that point need to integrate our Exchange infrastructure with some sort of monitoring solution like Operations Manager. And I'm not going to talk about Operations Manager in here. You don't need to know it for this particular series. It's not necessarily something that's going to be tested on you for the test. But in your organization, the only real way that you can be positively alerted before the big problems end up happening, like filling up databases or filling up disk drives, is through some sort of a monitoring and alerting solution that's outside of the scope of Exchange. Now that being said, though, we are going to talk a little bit about some of these elements just inside of Exchange. We want to talk also about monitoring mail flow, how you can perform message tracking and also look at the message queues. You will find that in some situations your message queues will begin to queue up if you have non-deliverable reports, if you end up having messages that can't get sent on for some reason. We'll talk about how you can designate an NDR recipient for those non-deliverable reports. What you're going to do is whenever you see those NDRs inside that particular box, you're going to want to troubleshoot those to figure out why you're experiencing problems. Now, this NDR recipient box is particularly handy in the case, as we talked about a couple of nuggets ago, when your organization, for some reason, your domain name, somehow gets on one of these blacklists, where other people are blocking mail from your organization because somehow you've done something wrong to get on a list that says that you're a bad internet citizen. So these NDRs and troubleshooting these NDRs will help you identify when things have gone wrong, because typically the NDRs will include the necessary information you need to know to identify why your mail is being bounced. Also available in Exchange are a number of analyzers and troubleshooters. These are sort of these very basic troubleshooting tools that will go through and analyze the different configurations and identify where you've made mistakes. I want to show you what those are. I've got one that I've actually run here so you can see what the results are. Microsoft is getting better at creating these analyzers and troubleshooters and really aligning them to the real needs of an actual implementation. So you may find that these will come in handy as you're going through the initial process of creating your Exchange organization and understanding what those best practices are. We're also going to spend a minute or two inside of the Exchange control panel in Internet Explorer to look at delivery reports. Now, your junior admins obviously are going to have access to that Exchange control panel, and so they can identify and pull out some delivery report information through the ECP to help them, again, troubleshoot some of the calls that may arise. And then also we'll show some of those log things that you need to be aware of: diagnostic logging, protocol logging, message tracking logging, connectivity logging, and even audit logging, because these are some of the not entirely obvious sorts of logs that you may want to configure and dial up whenever you're experiencing problems with mail flow in your organization today. So let's start by looking at those databases and the status and statistics associated with those databases. Now obviously there's a little bit of information here about your databases. If you look inside of the GUI and we view properties here on the database or on the database servers here, we get a little bit of information about those databases. But there are also some statistics that you may want to be aware of associated with those databases that you can really only pull through Windows PowerShell. Now one command you may want to take a look at here is get mailbox database. And this command more or less just pulls out some very basic information about the mailbox databases in your organization, what server they're homed on, if they're in recovery mode, what sort of replication type they have. Now that gives you, like I said, very basic information. But there's another commandlet here called get mailbox database statistics that provides just a little bit more information associated with the statistics about that database. Now you can't necessarily just directly pull these right off of through using only that commandlet. The real way you want to do that here, as I paste in another command here, is to get the mailbox database, here mailbox database 2, you're gathering that mailbox database object, and from that mailbox database object, you're then piping the object into get mailbox statistics here. So you can see that I'm taking that object, I'm piping into the statistics, and then I'm sorting out some useful information here, such as total item size, I'm formatting by display name, total item size, etc. What I'm going to get out of this is some great information about how big the individual items are inside of that database. You'll see here's 264 items for the Greg Shields username, and then there's a system mailbox, and then there's that conference room A mailbox that we created earlier. So take a look at the individual PowerShell commandlets, because I'm giving you some of the most basic of uses of these PowerShell commandlets, but there's a lot more out there that you can make use of to identify more statistics there. Another manifestation of this command that you might be able to be interested in using is get mailbox statistics, but instead of associated with a particular database, you can associate it with an individual username. Now in this case, I'm going to take a look at my mailbox, and I'm going to format as a list to get some more detailed information about my specific mailbox and all the characteristics that are associated with my mailbox here. It's the same data that I just pulled out in that previous commandlet, but here it's associated just with my name and giving me all of those characteristics that are associated with my name. You know, I can do the same thing with public folders as well. Get-public folder will provide information about the public folders on your server. And get public folder statistics, get public folder statistics will provide details about the individual statistics associated with that public folder as well. Here are the public folders that we have, and here my public folder. There's no items in here because I haven't added any items, and when the last access time for that public folder was. Again, I'm trying to give you really the information you need to dig into PowerShell and to discover your own ways that you can make PowerShell work for you. These statistics are available again through PowerShell. They provide a lot of the data that you're going to need to identify things like sizes and last access times and those very specific information that you're going to need for troubleshooting. Now, I want to talk a little bit here also about the idea of monitoring for individual mail flow. Inside of an Exchange organization, there's always mail moving around. It's coming out of the mailbox server, it's hitting the hub transport server, maybe hitting another hub transport server, hitting another mailbox server, maybe going out to the internet and coming back. So you can see that monitoring the flow of mail inside of your organization can be relatively useful. Now there's a couple of ways you can do this. One of which is to simply perform message tracking, to actually track a message as it goes through the organization. Another is to manage those message queues. The first I want to show you here is this message tracking, and it uses a tool that's available down here inside of the toolbox. You'll notice if we scroll down here, we see message tracking, where we can track messages inside of the web management interface. I'm actually going to bring that up here because I've got the Exchange Server Control Panel brought forward, and we're taking a look at the reporting nodes here. Here we can take a look at some delivery reports as the junior admins in our organization, or even you, the senior admin of the organization, to help you track down situations that may be going wrong with that mail. Now you'll see here I can select the mailbox that I want to search. Let's take a look at my mailbox here, and then I can search for messages sent to or received from particular users in the organization, and then I can search for words in the subject line to help me again find out what sorts of messages are out there and get more information about the delivery of those messages. So this is one tool that's available for you, but really another very handy tool, which is also available here under the toolbox, is the ability to look at the individual message queues that are out there. Remember, these queues are the ones that are actually queuing up the mail as it's getting moved from one location to the other. This is the concept of the queue viewer. I've actually brought the queue viewer up here, and you'll see here that the queue viewer has this next hop domain for submission, and delivery type is undefined. Right now there's no messages in the queue. Now you won't be able to see any messages in the queue if you don't have some sort of performance condition going on inside of your environment, because your environment will be able to move those messages around and they won't actually be queuing up. Also, if you don't have any connectivity problems in your environment, you're not going to see messages here. So having a message count of 0 can be considered a good thing, because that means that you're not experiencing any problems. Let's actually create a problem so we can see what it looks like inside of this queue viewer here. I'm actually going to suspend the queue here so I can actually create a problem whereas the messages are not getting sent out. Let me actually switch over here to my little client that I have set up here with Microsoft Outlook, and let's try to send a little piece of mail out. Let's see. Let's try to send a piece of mail to my partner, Don Jones. Don at concentratedtech.com. I'm having a problem today. Did you get this? Now obviously Don's not going to get this message because we've turned off that queue. It's not actually going to submit that message because, well, it's going to stick in that queue. Here's the message that's actually being stuck in that suspended queue at this point. Now what we can do is actually right click to view the individual messages in the queue and help us identify again, are there some problems with these messages? Do they have a spam confidence level that's too high? Is their status corrupted in some way? Do they have an improper status? Are they not ready to send? What is their queue ID? Where did they come from? And then what is their subject and what is their error messages? So what this queue viewer does is it provides you, again, a location where you can track down the individual messages, message by message, and find out why those messages aren't being received at the other end. Now obviously if I go back here to the queue and then resume the queue, you'll see that that message count goes very quickly from 1 to 0 because, well, I'm able to send that message back out. Now there may come the time when you actually want those non-delivery reports to actually get forwarded to your own mailbox or to a special mailbox that you're monitoring so that you can actually take a look at those NDRs. This is in addition to actually viewing the queues over here. Now by default, Exchange has its own special recipient object called the Microsoft Exchange recipient. And you can think of this as kind of like an internal postmaster. Anytime that you have an NDR, that NDR is going to get forwarded to that Microsoft Exchange recipient. However, if you don't actually set some of the characteristics of that Exchange recipient, those NDRs are going to get discarded. Now the way that you go about doing that is once again here inside of PowerShell. And what we want to do here is actually create a PowerShell command. And the one I want to use here, I'm going to paste over. Set organization config, Microsoft Exchange recipient, reply recipient, and G-Shields. What this is going to do is it's effectively saying I want the G-Shields object to be that location where those NDRs are set. And this allows you to, again, monitor those as they're coming in, and you can later turn those off once you get things figured out in your organization. But this provides a mechanism, as I said before, to help designate who's going to receive those NDRs, and then also to assist in resolving those NDRs when you have a problem in your organization today. Now, a lot of those NDRs can be based off of a poor design. If you have a bad design in your organization, that's when you're really going to experience more problems than if you just simply have a good design where your mail is able to flow in and out of the organization with best effort. Now the way that you can actually go about identifying whether you have that good design is through this best practices analyzer. Now the best practices analyzer here gives you the ability to look at the different types of configurations inside of your Exchange organization and to have this troubleshooting tool identify when your configuration is not configured to best practices. Now you'll see here I can connect to Active Directory, start a new best practices scan, and then view one of those best practices reports after they're done. Running one of these reports can take 10, 11, 12 minutes or more to actually resolve. And so what I've done is I've actually pulled this report so you can take a look at what a report would look like for a sample organization. Now remember, this is just an organization that we've put together for the purposes of this video, so you're going to see some issues in here. You'll notice in here that we've got an unrecognized Exchange signature in here for the domain Nugget Lab. The dedicated heartbeat's not found. Our quorum log is too small. An Exchange server could not be contacted simply because I've powered down EX2 Nugget at this point. Same thing down here for those DAGs. We've got a bad heartbeat and a quorum log that's too small. Notice that we've got VMware detected here as the solution that we're running on top of, and that's got a warning light here. Our application log size and our cluster log size are not set on either of these. Effectively, what this allows us to do is to give us an idea that we have the right sort of configuration for our Exchange organization, and really to help us give us the warm fuzzy that we're doing the right thing. Now, this best practices analyzer is not the only analyzer that's out there. Microsoft also supplies, if we scroll down here, the remote connectivity analyzer to verify end-to-end scenarios with all of your Exchange servers out there, and then also the performance troubleshooter down here, as well as the mail flow troubleshooter up here. These 4 tools help you identify when you're experiencing problems in your organization and help you really understand what those problems can be. You'll see here I've brought up the remote connectivity analyzer so that you can take a look at some of the connectivity tests that it will run. For example, some of the more complex client-side things that are set up involved with Exchange ActiveSync and ActiveSync Auto Discover, Exchange Web Services, synchronization and service account access, some of those Office Outlook connectivity tests. All of these you can run. If you just want to select one of these and choose the next button, this will walk you through some of those sessions and allow you to understand what's going wrong with your organization. In this case, my session's timed out here, so I can't actually show you what these look like. But these are more or less good tools to help you identify when problems exist. The last thing we want to talk about down here is associated with configuring logging, and there are a number of different logging reports that you can configure inside of your Exchange organization. Now, most of these are set up here for these individual diagnostic logging reports, and these diagnostic logging reports can be exceptionally well designed. There's a lot of granularity associated with those reports to help you understand what's going on. Now you'll see here if I right click on one of the servers here, I have managed diagnostic logging properties, and that brings up a wizard that identifies all of the individual diagnostic logging locations where we can set whether we want the logging level to be at the lowest level, a medium level, a high level, etc. Take a look here. Let's look at the assistance or the MS Exchange cluster here. For each of these, we can identify what we want that setting to be, lowest versus expert on the other side. Now, for any of these, you have to be very conscious whenever you dial up the logging here, because that's going to fill up those logs, and it can consume an incredible amount of disk space for doing that. Make sure whenever you're setting these logging levels up that you don't just necessarily go and set them all to expert. You'll notice also that we have the ability to reset all the services back to their default logging levels once you've solved the problem in your organization. And this is a good practice to do so that you don't actually end up filling up those logs and eventually filling up your disk space in your environment. Now, there are 4 more types of logging that I want to show you in this particular nugget. Those are protocol logging, message tracking logging, connectivity logging, and also audit logging. You're actually familiar with audit logging. You've experienced audit logging before inside of your regular Windows domain. However, these other 3 are important to look at because there are some configurations that you can turn up or turn down if you're experiencing problems. Let's go back to our Exchange organization here, and what I want to do is go up to the hub transport role here and take a look at the different connectors that are available both on send and receive. Now, for any of these connectors, we can take a look at the individual connector and choose the properties, and you'll notice here this protocol logging level. By default, that send connector is not going to have any logging going on associated with what it's doing, but we can actually turn up that log level from none to verbose if we're experiencing problems. You're going to do that on a connector by connector basis for both the send connectors as well as the individual receive connectors down here under hub transport. If we take a look at the client connector down here, we have the same location where we can change that protocol logging level here. Now, this is the location where we do protocol logging. The next thing we want to do is identify where we can actually set up message tracking logging as well. That's done back down here under the hub transport role. So let's go ahead and close this, and we look at server configuration and select the hub transport folder here. What we want to do is take a look at the individual server here and choose properties, and you'll notice down here we have the ability to look at the individual log settings. Now, there's not a lot to take a look at here. Pretty much all we have the access to do is either enable or disable either message tracking or connectivity logging for this environment. And we can choose where we want that log path to be. Again, be conscious of these log paths so that you don't end up filling up that C drive on your server. The last thing we have to take a look at here is just straight up audit logging, and I'm not going to spend too much time with audit logging because really audit logging is done here inside of local security policy. And more often than not, your organization already probably has audit logging turned on via group policy for the various things that need to be audited in your organization. But be aware that audit logging here will capture some of the exchange events that are associated with mail moving around and users connecting in and making use of their available privileges and what have you. So be conscious of that because this is one of those pieces of logging that you need to be aware of. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've talked really about this sort of miscellaneous topic associated with exchange monitoring and reporting. We talked about monitoring databases and some of the PowerShell commands you can use to do that. We talked about monitoring mail flow and some of the very interesting little widgets that you have inside of the Exchange organization and inside of the Exchange Management Console for doing message tracking and also for managing message queues. We looked at some of those analyzers and troubleshooters and generated delivery reports, and then we also did some very basic looking at the different types of ways to configure logging in your environment. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.